In the land of Ishangala, where the mighty iroko trees stretched into the sky and the evening drums echoed across the valleys, there lived a man named Tobechukwu and his wife, Ayotunde. Their hut was small, their harvests were meager, and their burdens were heavy. Yet, Ayotunde's spirit was unbroken. This is the story of how a wife's kindness, patience, and loyalty turned hardship into prosperity, and sorrow into blessings. But before we begin, do not forget to click the subscribe button, so that the wisdom of our ancestors may continue to reach you through stories like this. Long ago, in the heart of Africa, there was a village called Ishangala. The name meant, place where dreams are born, but for many people living there, dreams seemed far away. The village sat between rolling hills covered with tall grass that danced in the wind. Ancient iroko trees stood like guardians, their branches reaching toward the sky. At night, the sound of drums would travel from hut to hut, carrying stories and songs from one family to another. In this village lived Tobechukwu, a young man whose name meant, praise God. He was tall and strong, with hands made for farming and a heart full of hope. But hope alone cannot fill an empty stomach or repair a leaking roof. Tobechukwu's small farm sat at the edge of the village, where the soil was hard and the sun burned too hot during the day. Other farmers had better land closer to the river, where the earth was dark and rich. But Tobechukwu worked with what he had. His wife, Ayotunde, whose name means, joy has returned, was known throughout Ishangala for her gentle spirit and beautiful smile. Even when times were hard, she found reasons to laugh and sing while she worked. Their mud hut had only 2 rooms, one for sleeping and one for cooking. The roof was made of dried grass that sometimes leaked when the rains came heavy. But Ayotunde kept it clean and welcoming, decorating the walls with colorful cloths and filling clay pots with wildflowers. Every morning before the sun rose, Tobechukwu would walk to his fields carrying his farming tools. The metal hoe was old and sometimes the handle would break. His machete was sharp enough to cut weeds, but not sharp enough to cut through his problems. The yam seeds he planted each season grew slowly. While other farmers harvested full baskets of yams, Tobechukwu would return home with only half a basket. The cassava plants in his field produced roots that were small and tough. The maize grew, but the ears were thin and the kernels were few. Why does the earth refuse to bless my hands? Tobechukwu would ask himself as he watched the sunset paint the sky orange and red. Ayotunde would find him sitting under the old mango tree behind their hut, his head in his hands, worry lines creasing his face. My husband, she would say softly, placing her hand on his shoulder. The earth is like a child. Sometimes it takes time to learn how to give. But other men's farms produce plenty, Tobechukwu would reply. Their wives wear beautiful clothes and their children's bellies are full. What am I doing wrong? Ayotunde would sit beside him on the ground, her simple wrapper spread around her like flower petals. You are not doing anything wrong. You work harder than any man in Ishangala. You wake before the roosters crow and you return home when the crickets sing. Your time of blessing will come. As the seasons passed and Tobechukwu's struggles continued, people in the village began to talk. Women gathering water at the well would whisper when Ayotunde walked by. Poor girl, they would say. She married the unluckiest man in Ishangala. Look at her wrapper, another would add. It has been sewn and re-sewed so many times. My daughter's doll is dressed better. If she were my daughter, I would tell her to find a new husband. There are wealthy hunters and successful traders who would take her as their wife. The men were no kinder. At the village meetings under the great baobab tree, they would shake their heads when Tobechukwu's name came up. That man is cursed, old Okunchu would say. 3 seasons of poor harvest cannot be bad luck alone. Maybe his ancestors are angry with him, suggested Chidi, whose own farm produced enough yams to sell at the market in the next village. Or maybe he is just lazy, laughed Ikeen, the village's most successful farmer. Some men talk about hard work, but few actually do hard work. Tobechukwu heard these whispers. They followed him like shadows, making his shoulders bend with shame and his steps grow heavy. One evening, after a particularly hard day in the fields, he came home to find Ayotunde preparing their simple dinner of boiled yam and palm oil. "Wife," he said sadly, "perhaps the villagers are right. Perhaps you would be happier with a man who can provide better for you." Ayotunde stopped stirring the pot and looked at her husband with surprise. "What words are these coming from your mouth?" "I have been thinking," Tobechukwu continued, sitting on their wooden stool. "You are beautiful and kind. You can cook and clean and sing like the birds. Any man in Ishangala would be proud to call you wife." Ayotunde set down her wooden spoon and knelt before her husband. "Tobechukwu, look at me." He lifted his eyes to meet hers. "When I married you, did I promise to love you only when the harvest was good? Did I promise to stay only when our pockets were full of money? No, but did I promise to honor you only when the neighbors praised you? Did I promise to support you only when the road was easy?" Tobechukwu shook his head. "I promised to be your wife in good times and bad times. I promised to share your joys and your sorrows. I promised to walk beside you whether the path was smooth or rocky." She took his rough hands in her smaller ones. "My husband, wealth may be slow to come, but a patient heart builds a lasting home. Money can disappear like morning mist, but love grows stronger with time." That night, as they lay on their simple mat listening to the night sounds of Ishangala, Ayotunde made a decision. If her husband's burden was heavy, she would help him carry it. If the work was hard, she would work beside him. If the village mocked them, she would stand proud at his side. Love, she knew, was not just feeling. Love was action. The next morning, Ayotunde woke before the sun and prepared to go to the fields with her husband. "Wife, what are you doing?" Tobechukwu asked, seeing her tie her wrapper tight around her waist and pick up a small hoe. "I am going to help you farm," she replied simply. "But women do not work in the yam fields. They tend the house and care for children and prepare food. This woman will do whatever needs to be done to help her family succeed." And so began a new pattern in their lives. While other wives stayed home to cook and clean, Ayotunde worked beside her husband in the fields. She learned to plant seeds in straight rows. She learned to pull weeds without damaging the young plants. She learned to build small mounds of earth around the yam plants to help them grow strong. Her hands, which had been soft from household work, became rough and calloused. Her back, which had been straight from walking gracefully through the village, became sore from bending over the crops. Her skin, which had been smooth and light, became darker from long hours under the sun. But her spirit remained bright. "See how the morning glory vines climb toward the sun," she would say as they worked. "Even in poor soil, they find a way to reach for light." When Tobechukwu felt discouraged by the slow growth of their crops, Ayotunde would point to the tiny green shoots pushing through the hard earth. "Look, my husband. Life is winning against the stubborn ground." The people of Ishangala did not know what to think about Ayotunde working in the fields like a man. "Have you seen Tobechukwu's wife?" the women would ask each other. "She works in the dirt like a common laborer." "It is shameful," declared Mama Ngozi, the oldest woman in the village. "A woman's place is in the home, not digging in the earth like a pig searching for roots." "Poor girl has lost her mind," whispered Adana, wife of the successful trader Ikena. "No proper woman would lower herself to such work." Some of the men were even more critical. "Tobechukwu cannot even provide for his wife properly," laughed Ikene. "Now she has to work like a man to survive." "It is disgraceful," agreed Okunchu. "In my day, men took care of their families without help from their wives. But a few people in the village saw something different." Old Mama Kemi, who was known for her wisdom, watched Ayotunde working in the fields and nodded approvingly. "That young woman understands something the others do not," she told her daughter. "Marriage is not one person carrying the other. Marriage is two people carrying each other." Young Ada, who was not yet married, secretly admired Ayotunde's courage. "I hope when I marry, I will have the strength to support my husband the way Ayotunde supports hers, she told her friend Blessing. But these voices of support were few and quiet, while the voices of criticism were many and loud. As the months passed, Tobechukwu and Ayotunde began to see small improvements in their farm. The extra hands meant more work could be done. The extra eyes meant problems could be spotted and fixed quickly. When insects attacked their yam leaves, Ayotunde noticed first and they were able to remove the pests before serious damage occurred. When weeds began to choke their cassava plants, her quick action saved the crop. Two people can see what one person might miss, she told her husband as they worked side by side removing harmful insects from their maize plants. Their harvest that season was still not as good as their neighbors, but it was better than their previous harvests. They had enough yam to last through the dry season and even a small amount to sell at the market. We are making progress, Ayotunde said as they stored their harvest in the small granary behind their hut. But the other farmers still laugh at us, Tobechukwu replied. They say we work twice as hard for half the reward. Let them laugh, Ayotunde said firmly. The last laugh belongs to those who never give up. That evening, as they sat outside their hut eating dinner, Ayotunde noticed something different about her husband. His shoulders seemed straighter. His voice carried less sadness. The worry lines around his eyes had begun to fade. Working together had not only improved their farm. It had restored Tobechukwu's confidence and hope. Tomorrow we will plant the new field, he said, pointing to a section of land they had been clearing of stones and thorns. Tomorrow we will plant, Ayotunde agreed, emphasizing the word we. But just as things began to improve for Tobechukwu and Ayotunde, nature prepared to test their resolve in the harshest way possible. The dry season that year lasted longer than anyone could remember. The rains that usually came in the 4th month did not arrive. The 5th month passed with no clouds in the sky. By the 6th month, even the oldest people in Ishangala began to worry. The great river that ran beside the village became a thin stream. The wells that provided water for drinking and cooking began to run low. The grass on the hills turned brown and brittle. But worse than the lack of water was what it meant for farming. The seeds that had been planted with hope began to wither in the ground. The young plants that had started to grow began to droop and die. The sky has forgotten us, moaned Okunchu as the men gathered under the baobab tree to discuss the crisis. This is the worst drought in 50 years, added Chief Adebayo, the village leader. If the rains do not come soon, we will have no harvest at all. Panic began to spread through Ishangala. Some families packed their belongings and left to find relatives in other villages where the drought might not be as severe. Others sold their remaining goats and chickens to buy grain from traders who traveled through the region. The market, which usually bustled with activity, became quiet and almost empty. People had little to sell and less money to buy. Tobechukwu stood in his field looking at the dying plants and felt his heart breaking. All the progress he and Ayotunde had made seemed to be disappearing like water in sand. What is the point of continuing? He asked his wife as they surveyed the damage. Even if we work day and night, we cannot make rain fall from an empty sky. Many of their neighbors had already given up. Chidi had taken his family to his brother's village 3 days' walk away. Ikeen, the successful farmer who had often mocked Tobechukwu, had sold his land and moved to the city. Perhaps we should leave too, Tobechukwu said. Perhaps this is a sign that we should find a new place to live. Ayotunde was quiet for a long time, looking at the brown earth and the struggling plants. Then she knelt down and picked up a handful of soil, letting it run through her fingers. My husband, she said finally, do you remember the story your grandmother told us about the great drought that came to her village when she was young? Tobechukwu nodded. His grandmother had often told stories of hardship and survival. She said that those who ran away when times were hard never learned the sweetness of victory. But those who stayed and fought through the difficult season were rewarded with the most abundant harvests they had ever seen. But what if the rains never come? Ayotunde stood up and brushed the soil from her hands. Then we will have tried our best with dignity. But what if they do come? What if this is the test that comes before the blessing? That evening, while their remaining neighbors sat in their huts praying for rain, Ayotunde convinced Tobechukwu to take an action that seemed like madness. "We should plant more seeds," she said. Tobechukwu stared at his wife as if she had lost her mind. "Plant more seeds? In this drought?" "Wife, the seeds we planted months ago are dying. Why would we waste our remaining seeds on ground that is hard as stone?" "Because," Ayotunde replied, her eyes bright with determination, "hope is first watered in the heart before it is watered by the sky." She went to their small storage room and brought out the yam seeds they had been saving for the next planting season. They were their last seeds, their insurance against total failure. "If we plant these and they die, we will have nothing left for next season," Tobechukwu protested. "If we do not plant them, we will have nothing this season and nothing next season," Ayotunde replied. "But if we plant them with faith, we give hope a chance to grow." Against all logic and the advice of everyone who remained in the village, Tobechukwu and Ayotunde spent the next 3 days planting their remaining seeds in the dry earth. People who saw them work shook their heads in pity. "They have finally lost their minds," said Maman Ngozi. "The sun has cooked their brains. It is sad to see such desperation," added Adana. But Ayotunde sang as she worked, her voice carrying across the quiet fields like a prayer set to music. For 2 weeks after they finished planting, nothing happened. The sky remained clear and merciless blue. The earth remained hard and cracked. The temperature during the day was so hot that even the lizards hid in whatever shade they could find. Tobechukwu began to lose heart. "We have planted our future in cursed ground," he said one evening as they sat outside their hut. "We have planted our future in faithful ground," Ayotunde corrected. "Cursed ground would refuse to accept seeds at all." That night, as they lay on their sleeping mats, Ayotunde listened to the silence outside. For months, the nights had been completely quiet except for the occasional cry of a night bird or the distant howl of a jackal. But tonight, something was different. At first, it was just a feeling, like the air was holding its breath. Then came a soft rumbling sound, so faint it might have been imagination. Ayotunde sat up on her mat, straining to hear. The rumbling grew louder, and suddenly she knew what it was. Thunder. "Tobechukwu," she whispered urgently, shaking her husband awake. "Listen." They both lay still, holding their breath. Thunder rolled across the sky like the voice of the ancestors speaking from the heavens. Then came the first drops of rain on their grass roof. Soft at first, then harder still, until the sound became like drums celebrating the end of a long war. Tobechukwu and Ayotunde ran outside into the falling rain, lifting their faces to the sky and letting the precious water wash over them. All around the village, people emerged from their huts, laughing and crying with relief. Children who had barely seen rain in their young lives danced in the muddy puddles forming in the paths between homes. "Thank the ancestors," shouted Chief Adebayo. "The drought is broken." The rain fell for 3 days and 3 nights. Not the violent storm rain that washes seeds away, but the gentle, steady rain that soaks deep into the earth and brings life. When the rain finally stopped, Tobechukwu and Ayotunde walked to their field to see what had happened to the seeds they had planted in faith. What they saw made them fall to their knees in wonder. All across their field, tiny green shoots were pushing through the rain-softened earth. Row after row of new yam plants, their leaves bright green and full of life. But more than that, the older plants that had been dying during the drought had also recovered. The yam plants were growing tall and strong. The cassava was producing broad, healthy leaves. Even the maize they had thought was lost was showing new growth. "Look," Ayotunde whispered, pointing to their field. "Life is winning against the stubborn ground." But the miracle was not finished yet. As the days passed and the sun returned with gentle warmth instead of harsh heat, something extraordinary became clear. While Tobechukwu and Ayotunde's fields flourished with abundant growth, their neighbors who had abandoned their farms or failed to plant new seeds found themselves with little to harvest. The families who had left the village returned to find their fields empty and their homes damaged by the drought. Those who had stayed but given up hope discovered that their lack of faith had cost them the blessing. Only Tobechukwu and Ayotunde, who had planted their last seeds in dry ground with nothing but hope to water them, found themselves with fields that seemed touched by magic. Their yam plants grew bigger than any yams that had ever been seen in Ishangala. Their cassava roots became so large that one plant could feed a family for a week. Their maize ears grew long and thick, with kernels that gleamed like golden beads. "How is this possible?" asked Okunchu, staring at the abundance in wonder. "We planted in faith when everyone else planted in fear," Ayotunde replied simply. Word of the miraculous harvest began to spread beyond Ishangala. People from neighboring villages came to see for themselves the farm that had bloomed in the desert. Traders offered high prices for their produce. The chief of a distant village sent messengers asking to buy seeds from their remarkable plants. But the greatest charm was not in their fields or their fortune. It was in how the people of Ishangala now looked at Tobechukwu and Ayotunde. Where once there had been mockery, now there was respect. Where once there had been whispers of pity, now there were words of admiration. "I was wrong about Tobechukwu," admitted Ikin, who had returned from the city when he heard about the miracle harvest. "He is not unlucky. He is blessed by patience." "And his wife," added Mama Ngozi, her tone completely changed from her previous criticism. "She is not shameful for working in the fields. She is wise in supporting her husband." Young women in the village began to ask Ayotunde for advice about marriage and partnership. "How did you know to keep faith when everything seemed hopeless?" asked Ada. "Faith is not knowing that good things will happen," Ayotunde replied. "Faith is deciding to do good things even when you do not know what will happen." But with their success came an even greater test of character. The same families who had mocked them during their struggles now came asking for help during the hungry season. The same men who had called Tobechukwu cursed now stood at his door asking for loans of grain to feed their children. "What should we do?" Tobechukwu asked his wife privately. "These people showed us no kindness when we suffered." Ayotunde thought for a moment, then smiled. "They showed us exactly what we needed to see," she said. "They showed us who we did not want to become." And so Tobechukwu and Ayotunde opened their doors and their granary to anyone in need. They shared their abundance freely, asking nothing in return except that people treat each other with kindness. Their home became a place of gathering where hungry families could find food and discouraged farmers could find hope. Ayotunde would tell stories while people ate, always ending with lessons about patience, faith, and the power of working together. "Remember," she would say, "a blessing shared is a blessing multiplied." The village chief, Chief Adebayo, called a special meeting under the great baobab tree to honor Tobechukwu and Ayotunde publicly. "This couple has shown us what true wealth means," he announced to the gathered villagers. "It is not just having plenty for yourself. It is having enough to share with others." He turned to Ayotunde and spoke directly to her. "This woman's kindness has turned poverty into prosperity. Let all women and men learn from her patience, for she has taught us that true wealth is built on unity and love." The crowd erupted in applause and ululations. For the first time in years, Tobechukwu stood tall with pride, not shame. But the greatest pride belonged to Ayotunde, who had never stopped believing in her husband or their future together. That evening, as they sat outside their hut watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Tobechukwu took his wife's hand. "You saved me," he said quietly. "No," Ayotunde replied, squeezing his hand gently. "We saved each other." Years passed, and the story of Tobechukwu and Ayotunde became legend in Ishangala and beyond. Their farm continued to prosper, but more importantly, their marriage became an example for young couples throughout the region. When young people came asking for advice about love and marriage, Ayotunde would share the lessons she had learned. "Marriage is not finding someone to complete you," she would say. "Marriage is finding someone to join you in completing something greater than either of you could build alone." She would tell them about the importance of loyalty during difficult times, the power of working together toward common goals, and the blessing that comes from treating each other with respect and kindness. When hardship comes, and it will come, remember that you are not facing it alone. Two people sharing a burden makes it lighter. Two people sharing hope makes it stronger. Tobechukwu would add his own wisdom from their journey. Pride will tell you that accepting help makes you weak. But love teaches that offering help makes you strong, and accepting help makes you wise. Their story spread from village to village, carried by traders and travelers who had witnessed their transformation from struggle to success. And always, the lesson remained the same: true wealth is not measured in gold or land or cattle, but in the strength of the bonds between people who choose to love and support each other through every season of life. The drums of Ishangala still echo across the valleys in the evening, and sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can hear them telling the story of the wife who shared her husband's burden and turned it into a blessing. And so it was that Ayotunde's gentle spirit and unwavering support transformed the fate of her family. Where others mocked, she remained faithful. Where her husband faltered, she lifted him with love. From that day, the people of Ishangala would say, "A wife who shares her husband's burden plants the seeds of blessings for generations to come." Remember this, dear listener: patience, respect, and kindness in marriage are treasures greater than gold. When you stand together through the storms, you will dance together in the sunshine. When you plant seeds of faith in dry ground, you prepare for harvests of abundance. The ancestors teach us that love is not just a feeling that comes and goes like the wind. Love is a choice that is made new every day, in good times and bad times, in seasons of plenty and seasons of want. If you have learned something today, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe, so these timeless lessons may live on in every heart they touch. And remember, the strongest marriages are not those that never face problems, but those that face problems together with faith, patience, and unwavering love.